I'm Marge Massarello. I'm president of the league, and our two guests this evening. This is Rosemary Hillman. She's a 40-year member of the League of Women Voters, serving in various capacities in Glenview and Deerfield, so she had a long way to get here, including holding board positions, being a study member, registering voters, moderating candidate debates, and now participating in the League of Women Voters of Illinois Committee to abolish the Electoral College. And we have Joyce Williams, is the Director of Voter Registration for the League of Women Voters of the LaGrange area. She joined the League to work on issues related to voting rights and fair elections and became a member of the Committee to abolish the Electoral College at the League's Illinois State Convention in 2017. So, and welcome, both
And
of
I've
you.
been a member for a year.
Yes. We're glad to have you. Yes, one of our new members. Sarah, come sit closer because we're going to have these things to show.
Yeah, we're going to show.
Yeah,
Okay.
the pictures.
I'm going to walk around with some pictures.
All right, so we're gonna do the backup plan, and it is a scripted PowerPoint, and some of the slides you can live without, but some of the slides really are very visual. So Joyce will walk around when we get to those, and you'll keep track of where I am. Okay, so she has the printout of the PDF. Briefly. I'm assuming most of you are league members. So the Deerfield League went to the state convention and asked for a will of convention motion, which passed. And the will was that at the National League Convention now this year, the Illinois League would support making the existing league position to abolish the Electoral College a program focus. So what this means, and it passed. So what this means is the National League of Women Voters, as you know, has a whole book of positions, which were arrived at with study and consensus and, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. So our positions were arrived at with a lot of work and sweat. But the National League, naturally, they can't spend all their staff on every position all the time. So they pick certain positions to concentrate on for every 2 years, and it's decided at convention what will be the focuses, the foci. So there's a program planning process in January, February of the year before, before the convention. So this past January, February, there was a program planning, materials went out. And National League, instead of sending a survey with all our positions and saying, well, which ones do you want us to work on, which they've done in the past, and those meetings went on for hours, well, what about immigration? What about environment? This year they wrote to the leagues and they specifically asked, would you please consider not recommending any new studies or that we take on new positions, because we would like to concentrate on making democracy work, and the 4 prongs of that are voter suppression, gerrymandered districts, money in politics, and ease of elections. So we thought, you know what, the Electoral College fits naturally under that umbrella, and we would like the National League to add its position on the Electoral College. And for those of you afterwards, I have copies of all this information, so if you want an actual copy of the wording, it's there, to make it a program focus. So we formed a committee of members from that convention, because I had a little caucus there. So our committee, which has been endorsed by your board as well, sent out 2 emails to all the leagues in the country, 666 we sent out, and we had about a 50% rate open. And we asked them on their response forms to also ask National to please make the abolition of the Electoral College one of their program foci. And then many of them said, well, we need information and so forth. So the bright young people in our committee, not me, put together this PowerPoint presentation. And with the help of the Wilmette League of Women Voters, which has a website, anybody, league member not, can go to the League of Women Voters Wilmette website, and they have our PowerPoint presentation, they have the script, they have the PDF version, they have the league position and other information that anybody can download and use. So it's been interesting. We've had conversations with people from Florida and Montana and California. Some were pro, some were enthusiastic, and some said, "Nah, I don't care if we ever pay attention to this. We're happy the way it is." So, which you can't say as a league member. You have to just be quiet if you don't agree with the position, if you're speaking for League. So, but anyway, so what we're doing now that the period for the responses is closed, National will decide whether they come to convention and this request is either recommended or not recommended. If they come to convention in June and July and say, yeah, good idea, we got a lot of feedback, everybody wants to put some muscle behind this position, we think we will. Then good, we're great. If they don't, we're ready for a floor fight on the floor of the convention. We've been rounding up people to help us out. And even if they don't, we're not successful at convention to make it a program focus, it's still a League position. The League is still in favor of abolishing the Electoral College. So these materials could be used, by anybody. So that's kind of the background of what we're doing. So this is our PowerPoint, and we won't have the pictures, but Joyce will go around with the ones that really are helpful. And it's scripted, so I'll read it. And if you want to put it on, the script's online. I can send you a copy. You can do this just as easily as I am doing it today. Well, maybe you'll have the actual PowerPoint, but but even so. And we are going to work. We've had a couple of requests from organizations, like Rotary that meets over lunch, and they don't really have time for such a long one. So we are going to put together a shorter 20-minute version. So that will be in the future. So pretending we have the picture up there, here we go. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. And I might sit down, actually, I might sit down for a while, then I'll stand up when we show the pictures. The League of Women Voters recommends many changes to our election system that would increase fair and representative participation in our democracy, from issues such as voter information and registration to candidate selection and election procedures. Today, we'll talk about how the Electoral College damages our democracy and how the League is working to abolish it in favor of a direct popular vote for electing the president and vice president. They adopted this position in 1970 and most recently updated it in 2010. So this is a 47-year-old position. First, let's talk about where the Electoral College comes from. Why did the framers of the Constitution create the Electoral College? This is a discussion which could and has taken up several book chapters. I'll try to distill it down to its essential elements as understood by scholars who have tried to answer this question. The framers' most important consideration was that they wanted to limit the potential for corruption and concentration of power and to maintain independence between the executive and the legislative branches. Therefore, they wanted a method other than having Congress select the president, which was the method originally suggested by the delegates. So why not just elect the president directly by the people? Some of the Constitution's framers worried that large distances and lack of communication would make people ill-informed about the candidates and unlikely to choose the best person. They worried the people could be easily misled by a few designing men, in quotes, or would simply vote for the candidate from their own state. They wanted some kind of intermediary system. It's worth noting that very few of the framers were worried about, quote, angry mobs hijacking the selection of the president. The worries were more about how a vast population spread over a large country would be able to make an informed choice. There was some element of the ongoing tension between northern and southern states as well. Slave-holding states did not want direct election because they wanted their enslaved people to count as 3/5 of a person. Remember, that's part of the compromise, in determining the number of electors the state received. Remember, this was, I'm anticipating. Remember, this was the arithmetic used to determine their numbers in the House of Representatives. So having the elector system artificially boosts the voting representation of slaveholding states just as it was in Congress. Whereas a direct popular vote would only count the number of people who could vote, which of course did not include enslaved people. In fact, evidence suggests that there was a lot of discussion, confusion, and changing of minds during the process of figuring out the electoral system. It was one of the last issues discussed at the exhausting, long, hot, contentious convention, and fatigue and impatience may well have played a role in its adoption. It had broad but unenthusiastic support and seemed like the best they could do at the time. Quote, the second choice of many, but the first choice of few, with little idea of how it would play out in reality. One historian has called it a jerry-rigged improvisation. Most of the framers did intend for the selection of the president to be based on the popular wishes of the citizenry, with the elector system a, quote, intermediary system intended to breach the difficulties of distance and communication. James Madison considered the elector system to be the next best thing to direct selection, saying that the president is indirectly derived from the choice of the people. However, there is some evidence that they also expected the electors to exercise their own discretion in the selection of the president as a bulwark against corruption, bias, or misinformation. But the electors have almost always acted as a rubber stamp on the votes of the people, with very few exceptions. In those instances where an elector has voted differently than the state's voters dictated, they have generally met with a great deal of protest and anger. Which is to say, the people expect the electors to be a rubber stamp on the will of the people, and have never been interested in having them exercise their own discretion. Notice that some of the founders' original concerns remain relevant today. It's hard not to react sometimes. Citizens are quite able to become informed about the candidates no matter where they live. The framers' concern about the corruption and concentration of power that would come if Congress selected the president is still valid, but no one is proposing that we move to this system. And any notion that we might need electors to exercise their own discretion to overturn a so-called poor decision by the people has just not been borne out over time, taken the whole time. The people don't want this, and the electors have rarely done it. So in looking at how the Electoral College came about, it's clear that this is not a foundational text of our Constitution that should not or cannot be changed. It is an imperfect system that tried to address concerns of the framers at the time. Just as we have changed our system of electing the vice president and senators, we can also change our system of electing the president if we think it's necessary to improve our democracy. And there is ample evidence that this system is directly damaging to our democracy and does, in fact, need to be changed. Remember, the vice president used to be like the runner-up, so they weren't in the same party, and the senators used to be chosen by the state legislatures. So we have actually changed those elections with amendments. So, why does the League of Women Voters take the position to abolish the Electoral College? It's really very simple. It comes down to the concept of one person, one vote. The unintended result of the Electoral College is to put the choice of president and vice president in the hands of voters in only a few so-called battleground states or swing states. Here, you come this way. I don't have to tell you the names of these states. Joyce is holding up a picture of, let's see, what do we have there? You have Ohio, Florida, what else is there? Nevada, okay. Iowa, okay, and yeah. They are 4 of our well-known swing states, and they are among the 19 states that received all campaign visits from the 2 presidential candidates in 2008. The other 31 states received not a single presidential campaign visit. Well, you might ask, so what? in an age of television and smartphones, we can easily watch the candidates' speeches no matter where they make them, and we can get the highlights from any number of news outlets. True. But the problems with this system go well beyond our ability to hear what the candidates have to say. Part of the League's core mission is to encourage the informed and active participation of citizens in government. As such, perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Electoral College system is that it creates a disincentive to vote for citizens living in non-battleground states, which is the majority of people in our country. If you live in Illinois or Mississippi, why should you bother to go out and vote on a cold, rainy day when you know your state is going to go blue or red? And this is my favorite part, I'll interrupt, because if you're a third-party candidate, say in Illinois, if you favor the third-party candidate, why vote? That vote won't count. If you're a Republican lately, generally Illinois has been going Democratic lately, why vote? You don't have a chance, of getting those electoral votes. In fact, if you're a Democrat, why vote? Because it'll go Democratic most likely without you. So all we need are a couple of people to go vote, and they can have all 20, So it's a strong, that's the core of our League personality, is that we want people to vote, and this is a disincentive. And the young people at our convention were very strong on that. They felt that it just was very discouraging for voting. Well, that's enough ad-libbing. Okay, this is the strongest point. The data from 2016 bears this out. In the graph, you can see that the percentage of eligible voters who cast a vote for president was significantly lower in non-swing states compared to the swing states. The Electoral College decreases participation in our democracy. This is bad for democracy. Another significant negative effect of the Electoral College system is that it polarizes our electorate and exaggerates our sense of being a divided nation, a nation of red versus blue. All right, so you'll see how the states went by the color and the blue. So you would assume that those red states, they all have this red philosophy, and the blue states all have this blue philosophy. Well, did you know that in Alabama in 2016, 35% of the voters chose Hillary Clinton? That's a third of the state. Or that 32% of California voters chose Donald Trump? That was 4.4 million people voted for Trump, and their votes were erased as well. That is a lot of people, not a fringe minority, but a significant portion of the population of these states. And these are two solidly red or solidly blue states. What about Colorado, where 43% of voters went for Trump? Or Georgia, where 46% went for Clinton? Doesn't matter. You look at that map, all you see, red and blue, right and left, black and white. There are no centrists. There's no complicated middle ground. There's no reason to even talk to people in those other states because they are just too different from me. Their views are too extreme. The map with which we have all become so familiar is extremely damaging to our national unity and our ability to see the great variety of public opinions that exist everywhere and that deserve to be heard. Indeed, they need to be heard, as diverse opinions are as critical to democracy as the vote itself. Without the Electoral College, we wouldn't have to see our election results through this distorted lens. What if the election results simply look like this? All right, so 41 to 59. So if you see if you can walk around with that pie chart. Oh, and then Sarah has it too. Two numbers, both very large, even in the most lopsided of elections. Remember Reagan versus Mondale in 1984? You may remember it as the most lopsided Electoral College victory in modern history, which it was. And that's what it looked like. But you probably don't remember that 37 million people voted for Mondale, 41% of the population. This is not a trivial number. And it highlights the way the Electoral College simply erases the diversity of opinion in our democracy. Now, Reagan would have still won, but with that electoral result, it looked like such a mandate. it looked like such an overwhelming support of all his ideas. And it wasn't. He still won. He still would have won by the numbers, but with a different kind of sense of what his mission and goal was. Because when we see it through the Electoral College, almost all of those so-called blue votes are utterly forgotten, the Mondale votes, erased. Where did all of those Mondale voters go? They're just gone. They don't exist. All we see is 525 electoral votes to 13. And there it is. And that's, see how that pie chart is so much narrower by electoral votes, and it wasn't at all by the popular vote. If we began to see election results the way we do in the pie chart there, where it's more evenly divided, might we begin to see ourselves as part of a unified democracy, choosing our leader together, no matter where we live? So those, 30% of, or 46% of Clinton voters in Georgia have more in common with us in Chicago than we think. Well, Atlanta and Chicago, two big cities, Or the farmers in California have more in common with the farmers in Illinois and in Wyoming and in Alabama than they think they do. Imagine if instead of seeing ourselves as red or blue, we simply saw ourselves as American. Do you have that picture with the flag? Is that the next one? Okay. There we go, yeah. So we like that. We're all Americans. We've used it for a lot of our flyers. In fact, yours, I think. The results in two recent elections point us, of course, to another serious problem with the Electoral College, which is that it can lead to a presidential winner who did not receive a majority of the votes. This has happened 5 times in our history, and it's the main reason most people find the Electoral College troubling. You may have heard somebody say, well, yes, this is all true, but here's why the Electoral College still makes sense. We'd like to walk through the most common myths and misperceptions about what the Electoral College does and does not accomplish, what it was meant to do, and how it's impacting our democracy. All right, I'm going to sit down for a minute. All right, myth number 1. So here's some of the things that people have said to us and that we're responding to. Without the Electoral College, our presidents would all be chosen by a couple of big states like California, New York, and Texas. The fact is that direct election by popular vote would ensure that every person is equally represented, regardless of where they live. Here's an example. While California has the largest number of voters at about 12 million, the presidential vote is split just as it is in all states. Remember when I said that 32% of California voters went for Donald Trump in 2016? Once the state's votes were totaled, all 4.5 million of those Trump votes were erased. Why should only a portion of a state's votes count in choosing the president of all the people? In a national popular vote system, those votes would have been added to the national total along with votes from other states, regardless of who got the most in each state, and regardless of whether that state is big or small. The fact is that we no longer would be voting by state, but by person. So a California voter would get no more say in our presidential election than a voter from Mississippi, Rhode Island, Kansas, or any other state. This is what the framers intended when they unanimously agreed with James Madison's statement that the president is to act for the people, not for the states. Myth number 2. Smaller, less populated states need the protection of the Electoral College to ensure their interests are represented by the president. The fact is, there is no coherent small state or large state interest that needs protecting by the Electoral College. Even the smallest state has substantial diversity within it, and it is a fallacy to suggest that when a state goes red or blue, that this represents the interests of the entire state. The concerns of a farmer are likely to be very different than those of a computer programmer, whether they live in New Hampshire, Nebraska, or any other small state. Small states represent a great diversity of economic interests, and they share many of these interests with large states. So again, they have cities, they have farms, they have orchards, they have fishermen, whether you're a small state or a big state. For example, agriculture. Most farmers live in states with large populations, such as Texas, Florida, California, and Illinois. And they share economic interests with farmers from smaller states all over the country. The great political battles of American history have been fought between opposing ideologies or economic interests, not between large states and small states. There is no coherent small state interest that needs protecting by the Electoral College. The representatives of small states do not vote as a bloc in Congress, and their citizens do not vote as a bloc for president. In fact, the numbers from the 2016 election show this emphatically. The smallest states, those with fewer than 7 electoral votes, did not all go for the same candidate. In fact, they voted exactly the same as the largest states. 40% of small states went for Clinton, and 60% went for Trump. 40% of large states went for Clinton, and 60% went for Trump. Small states do not vote as a bloc, and they do not benefit from the Electoral College. In fact, smaller states are routinely ignored by presidential candidates under the current system. Instead, the candidates focus their time in the so-called swing states that will decide the election. 19 states received all campaign visits from the 2 presidential candidates in 2008, virtually ignoring the other 31 states, both large and small. So there is no basis for the myth that smaller, less populated states need the protection of the Electoral College to ensure their interests are represented by the president. And in fact, the Electoral College actually diminishes the rightful representation of residents of the larger states. For example, Virginia's population is almost 9 times larger than Delaware's. So there's a pictorial representation. But it only gets about 4 times as many electors because electors are based on the number of senators and representatives from each state. Is this fair? Myth number 3. The Electoral College protects the rights of the minority from the tyranny of the majority. Protecting minority rights is a critical part of the democratic society, and the Founding Fathers designed our government accordingly. As a result, 2 of our 3 branches of government are designed to ensure the protection of minority rights. The first is the courts. Their role is to ensure the constitutional rights of the individual, regardless of the opinion of the majority of the citizens. The second is the Senate, in which every state, regardless of population size, gets 2 representatives. This ensures that Wyoming gets heard just as loudly as New York, even though more people live in New York. The courts and the Senate protect the rights of minority groups. The president is supposed to represent the interests of all Americans as fairly and equally as possible. This means 1 person, 1 vote. Myth number 4. Abolishing the Electoral College will mostly benefit Democratic candidates. Modern analyses show that in 1960, Richard Nixon actually won the popular vote by about 48,000 votes over Democrat John Kennedy. So there you have a Republican who actually won. In 2004, something more recently, a shift of about 60,000 votes in Ohio would have given Ohio's electoral votes to Democrat John Kerry, who almost could have won the election, even though Republican George W. Bush had nearly 3 million more popular votes. So it would have been the reverse of this last one. So this system can and has affected both parties. This is truly a nonpartisan issue. The League of Women Voters supports a constitutional amendment that would replace the Electoral College with direct election of the president. Such an amendment has been proposed many times, and the latest was in 2016 by Senator Barbara Boxer of California and by Representative Charles Rangel of New York. The language is very simple. Proposing an amendment to the Constitution of the United States to abolish the Electoral College and to provide for the direct popular election of the President and Vice President of the United States. Each bill had only a couple of co-sponsors and no action was taken. We need to build a strong, loud, persistent voice of the people, urging our representatives in Congress to introduce and co-sponsor this bill again this year, maybe after the fall elections this year, but you know. We need to build momentum to make this an issue that Congress can no longer ignore. To show you that this can work, here is an impressive example. I love this one. The 27th Amendment. The 27th Amendment to the Constitution says that no law varying the compensation for the services of the senators and representatives shall take effect until an election of representatives shall have intervened. It basically says that Congress can't give itself a pay raise, that any raise would only apply to the next session of Congress. The funny thing is, this amendment was first introduced in 1791, and it was ratified in 1992. During the intervening 200 years, the issue had become a sore spot time and time again. Anytime Congress tried to give itself a raise, the people would revolt and throw them out of office. Reasonable cost of living adjustments were made, but the system always was ripe for abuse and never seemed quite right. Nobody really liked it, but nobody was bothering to do anything about it. Sound familiar? Then, in 1982, a college student from Texas began doing research for a paper about governmental processes. He ran across this proposed congressional pay amendment and decided to write his paper about amendments that have been passed by Congress but never ratified. He got a C on the paper, which made him really mad. So he decided he would just have to get that amendment ratified. He began writing letters to state legislators he thought would be most supportive. Maine signed on first in 1983, then Colorado in 1984. Every year, a few more states ratified it. Finally, in the early 1990s, congressional pay was again in the headlines after another pay raise, and he saw his chance. The public tide was turning around this utterly common sense issue, and arguments against it were becoming pretty difficult to defend. Sound familiar? By 1992, the states were racing to ratify it, wanting to go on record as the state that cast the final vote. It was a photo finish between Michigan and New Jersey, but Michigan won by a nose. As of today, 46 states have ratified the 27th Amendment. Abolishing the Electoral College would be a common sense amendment to update a system that most Americans agree is utterly out of date, confusing, and downright silly. It's time to start building the momentum that will once and for all abolish this dysfunctional system of electing our president. The first step is to contact our legislators and urge them to reintroduce and co-sponsor the amendment. Now, getting to a constitutional amendment will nevertheless take time. It's not going to happen this year. The League, therefore, also supports an interim measure that would effectively nullify the Electoral College and result in the election of the president by the popular vote, while we continue working on a long-time constitutional amendment. All right, so this portion, this PowerPoint is designed to be shown all over the United States. And so there's a little section here on a program called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. So these little paragraphs talk about it, and I'll explain it first. And Illinois has already signed on. So it's kind of a moot point in Illinois. And the idea of it is, I know it's in the script, but I'm going to tell you anyway. So if it takes 270 electoral votes to elect a president, if you can get states whose number of electoral votes equals 270, to sign this agreement that no matter which way their state goes, they will vote for the popular winner. So it's kind of, it depends. It depends how you look at it. It's a different way to make sure the popular vote winner wins. It is in our league position as an acceptable alternative. So as a league, we can't speak out against it. There are many pros and cons about it. So that's what this next section is. But the way I describe it is this. If if this compact had been in effect in 2016, say they had signed on to it 10 years before, and let's say Wisconsin had been one of the signers on it, then at this last election we had, Governor Walker would have to say to the people of Wisconsin, well, I know you voted for Trump, but see, we signed this agreement 10 years ago, so we're going to give all of Wisconsin's votes to Clinton. So that is all I'll say about that, but that's an alternative. So this is called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. It would guarantee the presidency to the candidate who receives the most popular votes in all 50 states and the District of Columbia, and it pledges the state's electoral votes to the candidate who wins the national popular vote, and it would not take effect until enacted by states possessing a majority of the electoral votes, which is 270. So I'll explain at the end because it's so complicated, and we already have it in Illinois, so I don't like to spend a lot of time on it, and I try to keep the ad-libs down when I talk about that. So anyway, so it is still being pursued, and our other leagues in some of the states are still pursuing it. And again, I'll ad-lib a little bit here. These Florida ladies are working on getting the compact passed in Florida, and they said to me, you know, if we go to our representatives and we say, oh, we want to abolish the Electoral College by amendment, they just turn their head and say, impossible, forget it, and they walk away. But they said if we bring them this idea, then at least they'll listen to us, you know, so maybe get the conversation going. So that's their argument. So there are many states that are still working to pass the compact in the different states. So it's out there if you ever hear about it, and I do have a handout on it too. So I'm going to skip over to another reform. One reform which the League specifically rejects is the voting by electors based on the proportional representation in lieu of the present winner-take-all method. Such a system would apportion the electoral votes of a state based on the popular vote in the state. So, for example, if 40% of Minnesota voters chose candidate A, that candidate would get 4 of Minnesota's 10 electoral votes. And they do that in Maine and they do that in Nebraska. The problem with this system is that it is actually fairly likely that no candidate would receive the 270 vote electoral majority needed to win. So if this happened and no one got the majority, according to the Constitution, which we also have copies of the Constitution if you like to take some today, we have everything for you, would send the election of the president to the House of Representatives, where each state, regardless of population, would receive 1 vote. So that's what happens if it goes into the House of Representatives. So like the Illinois delegation would have to get together and come up with 1 vote. And the Wyoming guy would have 1 vote because there's 1 representative from Wyoming and they're like, 20 from Illinois. So each get 1 vote. All right. This would further remove the election of the president from the will of the people and would be in direct contrast to the intent of the framers of the Constitution. You're probably scratching your head trying to figure out why this system would make it unlikely that a candidate would receive 270 votes. And we have some charts on this, which we'll pass them around. The reason is that we always have more than just 2 parties running for president. There are 3rd parties, 4th parties, and beyond. In the 2016 election, votes were actually cast for 31 different candidates, plus a none of the above in a few states. So let's run through a quick example with the 2016 election. You can almost see that Arizona has 11 electoral votes. 45% of voters chose Clinton, 50% chose Trump, and 5% chose another candidate. If we allot the electoral votes proportionately rather than winner take all, we get 5 votes for Clinton, 5.5 for Trump, and 1/2 for the others. Here's Colorado with 9 electoral votes, 47% for Clinton, 44% for Trump, and 9% for other. And you would have been able to see that their electoral votes get apportioned accordingly. And what is happening as the other candidates are taking just a little bit away from the total electoral votes in each state until we finally get to the total. And we see that neither candidate has reached 270 votes. So that's what would happen if all the states did what Maine and Nebraska do. So So the league does reject that. Thank you. So how can we help change this antiquated system? The first step is to help others in the community understand the good reasons for abolishing the Electoral College, and to make it clear we are much closer than we may realize to doing so. The next step is to find others who want to work with you on this. One good place to look is your local League of Women Voters group. The League is a natural home for the movement to abolish the Electoral College because the League is about making democracy work better for everyone. The League is specifically and proudly nonpartisan, which means that it can work to improve our democracy without partisan rancor and can help unite people around a common purpose. It has national reach and a trusted voice, and these can help leverage local grassroots action into a larger national strategy that can help us get across the finish line. If you know of other non-league groups who want to work on this issue, by all means, reach out to them. The more people working to solve this problem, the sooner we'll solve it. And these materials are available on the Wilmette website, League of Women Voters of Wilmette. A couple of specific first steps include learning where your state stands on the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. All right, we can cross that off our list. Illinois has signed on to it. And then for those states who get this PowerPoint who want to work on that, they can work on that if they want. And it's considered an acceptable temporary alternative until the Electoral College can be abolished by the League position. But the long-term goal is to get a constitutional amendment to abolish the Electoral College. Sharing this presentation with your legislators would be a great way to educate them on the issue. Above all, remember that this is a long-term project. If we expect success within a year, we'll be disappointed and lose our drive to continue. Celebrate small victories along the way by your own group and by others across the country. Each one brings us closer to our goal. Enjoy yourself in the process, make new friends, and appreciate the civic engagement that is the cornerstone of our democracy. This may seem like a daunting task, but remember, we've amended the Constitution to change the way we elect senators, to impose term limits on the presidency, to include Washington, D.C. in the election of the president, to eliminate the poll tax, to change the voting age to 18, all amendments that affect the way we elect our representatives in Washington. There's no reason we cannot abolish the Electoral College if we decide to do it. So let's get to work. Well, thank you for listening to all that long-winded. I'm happy to take some questions.
Do you know how many state leagues have already signed on to Illinois for the, what did you call
The
it?
compact?
The compact.
I do have the figures. I didn't read them to you here. Let's see. Here we go.
The compact has been enacted in California, DC, Hawaii, Illinois, Massachusetts, Maryland, New Jersey, New York, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Washington.
So,
And how many
votes?
How many electoral votes?
Yeah.
I thought it was 165.
I think it's that's in that neighborhood.
Does it sound right?
Yeah, that sounds
165?
right.
Yes, 165. So 105 more needed. It has passed one house in the legislatures of Arkansas, Arizona, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Maine, Mississippi or Michigan, I never know. Which one is it? Michigan, sorry. North Carolina, New Mexico, Nevada, Oklahoma, and Oregon.
So they're half.
So it's only been in one house of the legislature.
Yes.
And if the state signs onto it, it becomes legally binding. Walker can't just say, oh, I don't agree with it, I'm not gonna do it.
Well, that's a good question. What is the enforcement? Thank you. What is the enforcement of an interstate agreement? And even if it were abided with 1 year, what would be preventing them from backing out of it the following year? So that's I don't want to debate the compact because there's so many. I would just be showing my true colors with the negatives. So, but since it's in the league position, And again, when we're working in the convention this summer, it's possible, we've asked for a caucus room for our committee, and the ladies in Florida, who I'm now buddies with, have also asked for a caucus room because they're asking the National League to provide leadership on the compact part of the position. And so we've talked, and we don't agree on compact, not compact, but I'm starting to understand their point of view. And we said, well, National might put us together in one caucus room. And we said, that's okay, because we want National to lend some muscle to the whole position. And if it includes the compact, it still includes the abolition. Just let's get moving on this, And as she said, well, I guess in Illinois, you're kind of tired of twiddling your thumbs waiting for other states to, move along. And I said, yeah, we want to do some action. So we're not going to debate whether the compact should or shouldn't be in the league position. We just want to get the whole issue moving on along the way and get some support at the national level. So.
Question behind you, too.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
I thought I understood you to say that the league at the national level had it as a program focused to abolish electoral college since 1970?
It was not a program focus, it was a position.
A position.
It's in our, yes, it's
Since 1970. And do they keep tabs each time they get together to see what % of all the leagues are in support of that?
That's the program planning process. And so each league, usually in Illinois, we have the Illinois convention in the opposite year from the national convention. Wisconsin, the state league actually meets every year. But in Illinois, so at program planning time, in Illinois, they ask for input, and then the opposite years, national asks for input. So again, in past years, it's been like a laundry list of all the positions, and so the leagues kind of checked off things, and they kind of took all. Now, they're really asking us not to do that, although they offer those other things.
But do they know of their whole membership, how many are really in support of abolishing the electoral college and
Of
what-
making it a program, putting some muscle behind
Yeah,
it,
I
yeah.
mean, how
Because they
many are, you said 660?
we sent out to 660. I don't know. I don't know if they keep those statistics. Mm-hmm.
Because if the League of Women Voters in an area aren't on board with it, I mean, is the average citizen going to be on board? 'Cause
Oh,
usually the
okay. I
league
was wondering where
is
you were
like on the
driving,
cutting
yeah.
edge. So I would think they'd want to know where is their support and where is the reluctance? Because maybe the supporters could be leading the charge and kind of helping with the know-how of how to make it happen.
Well, that's what we're hoping to do at convention.
Yeah, so
That's what
then,
we're
but I mean,
hoping, yeah.
I would suggest that they take a little vote, even if they did it like,
Well, they did. They do with the program planning.
but I mean, so
yeah.
that they had a number, they produced a number.
They're
at
not
the
going to,
end.
they won't tell us the number. They'll just tell us what's recommended and not recommended.
So they wouldn't tell you out of 660 leagues, 500 were in support of it?
Well, you know what? We can ask. We can
Because
ask.
then you have a measurable thing,
Yeah,
okay?
we can
Okay,
ask.
only 20 people like it, or 500 people like it, because I think it builds,
I don't know if they have those statistics. Also, don't forget, not every league does national program planning. Not every league sends in an answer.
then maybe of the
Yeah.
ones that do national.
Of those that do. So it would have to be a percentage of those who turn in their answer. And again, if we hadn't sent out our email highlighting this, like in Deerfield, would we have thought when it came time for program planning, we'd look over, National wants to do voter suppression, gerrymandered districts, money in politics and elections. Our league would have said, oh, yeah, that sounds good, that's important, we're for that. It would be nice if they'd mentioned climate change. We might write a note, could you please include climate change? Or like North Carolina, we were talking in North Carolina, and they said, we're sorry, we have nothing against the position on the Electoral College, but we really need help on education issues. So they shared with us their paragraph that they were writing on education issues. Now, would they be opposed to National making the Electoral College a program focus? I don't think they'd be opposed, but they felt they wanted to put their input on education. So I don't think it's as clear cut as all that. And it's also, it's a little, that's why we're trying to rev up interest, you know,
I mean, I think
yeah.
someone once said the opportunity of the lifetime must be taken the lifetime of the opportunity.
Oh, I like
think-
that,
I think
yeah.
right now is the opportunity time. And then just one other question about the Wilmette website.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do they, like, I mean, because they're letting their intellectual capital be free and
Mm-hmm.
open to everybody who wants to go there and read it and download it, but do they tell, like, history teachers or people who teach civics, groups like that, that they can go there and download it?
Why wouldn't they be able to?
But I mean,
Yeah.
are they marketing it to, like, people?
No, well, only through these presentations right
Okay,
now.
So we should tell people.
Sure, yeah,
Okay, all right.
absolutely. So yeah, we had a committee, and because it's broadly being distributed, we had committee members that got together and really went through all the slides and all the pictures to make sure that they were copyright free and that they had, you know, free access and all that, so that there would be no problem with that. So that was a big part of the job. And Karen Glennemeyer is our authoress from Wilmette, and she wrote the text here, and with some collaboration from us, you know. So yeah. So I'm sorry I couldn't answer the first question precisely, but
It's good to measure things.
yeah.
But the question is whether the league nationally supports the abolition of the electoral college. The league has
Does,
adopted that as a
absolutely.
position. The
Right.
question is it a program focus or not?
Focus, right.
Does it get a particular focus? as
Yeah.
well?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
that's what we're driving for, because I'll tell you, I think if the National League at the Chicago Convention announced that it was making the Electoral College a program focus for the biennium, it would make the news. I think it would make the news, and I think people would, wow, you know, and get that conversation. Anyway, that's what you know, I'm dreaming, you know.
And my dream is, because it did this for me, is that there'd be an influx of young people joining the league. Because I truly believe that young people have more passion around this issue than, you know, than a lot of other issues that the league takes on.
It makes
And
no sense to them.
It makes no sense to them, and they've, in their lifetime, have experienced 2 cases very recently where there was a difference between a popular vote and the electoral college vote, and they don't quite get that, like, why should that be? And other issues that we take on, I think, are more confusing for them, like gerrymandering. You know, it's harder to wrap your mind around.
That's right.
Electoral college, that's easy.
Yeah, I was wondering, is there any information on why legislators might be opposed to abolishing the college?
You know what, I heard, who did I hear this? Yeah, I've been, like you, we all go to all these meetings, and I can't remember exactly where I was that they were talking about this, but one of the this came up on another, it was an environmental topic, I think, or maybe even guns. And the problem is the perception of the legislator of what his district believes. You know, they, like in certain sections of Illinois, say, they believe that their constituents are in favor of a particular point of view or opposed to a particular point of view, so they vote that way based on their perception and may not actually be accurate. So that's why it's so important to communicate over and over, you know, to your legislators and try to get people to show them that, no, you know, so that's, I think they perceive that, especially, I think it's perceived as all topics seem to be now, and this is just me speaking, this is not league, everything's either red or blue. So it feels like they think, oh, if you're red, then you got to be for the Electoral College. You know.
The thing I'm thinking of is the example you gave earlier. Since we're already on board, if we're going to be writing legislators, we don't need to write to ours. We can write to somebody else's. So if we knew what they're likely to say to us is to no, 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 I'm not going to do it, then we can sort of put it in a letter that says maybe you should look at.
You know what, that's not bad, except most legislators, we think, don't want to hear from anybody outside of their district. They only want to hear from their own district. So
One example you gave of the person who was doing his thesis.
yeah, I know, that was, I don't know how I mean, sure, you know, go ahead and try. I think even 1992, when he was successful, was markedly different than today. I think they've really closed ranks. But again, that's me speaking. It can't hurt. What could it hurt? And if you know people in those other states that are their constituents, get your friends and relatives to write, you know?
Well, I was thinking like Maine,
Yes.
Collins and Maine might be open to something like that. And there might be other people who are not part of the Republican board.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the voice of the people. Yes.
I recently tried to post a comment on the website of a congressman who was in another state or something on some issue, and you had to put in your location, and it just wouldn't accept something that was out of state or out of region. I think one of the big issues with the Electoral College abolition is the perception that it is impossible to abolish.
Yes.
Perception, exactly.
And I have to say that was my perception, because there was a lot of talk about this after the 2016 election for obvious reasons, and a lot of pundits on NPR talking about how it could be done and the impossibility of doing it, and the argument about why it's so impossible is because the way the demographics of the country are shifting and population is moving toward the coasts and toward the large cities, and those are where blue people tend to be concentrated, Democratic voters, that increasingly the Electoral College reflected, it increasingly gave a disproportionate weight to Republican voters in rural and southern areas, the traditional red areas. And that because that was the case, you would have to have a very strong, very motivated majority of Democrats in Congress to make any headway on this, and the Republicans, as they will, would fight this tooth and nail because it's part of their, political death as the demographics of the country go against them. And that was the reason that it would never happen. We're saying it would never happen. And so I came away with that feeling, we really need it, but it's impossible to happen. So I would say one of the first challenges is overcoming that perception that this is a fight worth undertaking.
Absolutely it is. That's why we're putting so much energy into it.
And as a personal example, I was at a forum for my congressional rep. I've told you this story, and his response to that question at the forum, because it did come up, maybe by me, was that it's just never going to happen. I mean, wouldn't even take it seriously. So I think a big part of this is to convince people and then convince legislators that this actually is something that is possible to do. And part of that is, the other part that I get excited about is that it's not only something that's possible to do, but it would be something that would be good for this country in terms of bringing it together. Those graphs that showed how the Electoral College really skews our perception of what the country is made up of. To find out that there's a huge percentage of people in California who vote Republican consistently, that is so important to understand that, the farm, like you were saying, and, that was beautifully written, I thought, in the presentation, a farmer in California has more in common with a farmer in Iowa than with a Silicon Valley entrepreneur in California. I mean, they're very, very different, and I think it would really help unite our country, and I think give a wake-up call to everybody on both sides of the aisle that when you look at the country as a whole, that there are a variety of feelings and opinions, and we have to learn to respect each other on that, rather than this, constant battling and divisiveness. So I think it's really a method that would help us understand that our country in a lot of ways is more united than we think.
And the other thing is, if we really, we sent this out all over the country. If leagues really do show our presentation all over the country, and then they really do go to their Rotary clubs and talk about it, and I tell people, everywhere you go, throw it in somewhere in the conversation. So when I go to see our club, I'll say, I'm doing that presentation tomorrow night, so I can't be at your meeting because, we're trying to get rid of the Electoral College. And when I'm at Rotary, I always bring it up, we had this. I bring it up, and so people will keep talking about it, eventually, and besides writing to the representatives, to try to change that perception that it's impossible, that people are really actually talking about it. So keep bringing it up every chance you have to throw it into the conversation, and eventually that, with writing to the legislators to change, you're right, that perception is very difficult. It's a shame Kerry didn't beat Bush, because it would have been shown that it's truly could have affected either party. But that's a good example, if you can get those numbers. It's hard to throw out numbers at people, but 60,000 would have given him the election, and Bush had 3 million ahead of him. So 60,000 change would have wiped out 3 million in the Bush-Kerry election. So, you know, they almost lost out. So, yeah. It's persistence. And we have so many other issues right now. You know, everybody is tearing their hair out for one thing or another. But I'll tell you why I like it, especially as a league project, because it's so fundamental to the purpose of the league, which is fair elections and the people speaking, and talk about voter suppression. You know, this is really voter suppression, is what it is. So I'm enthusiastic, and so if we can get some enthusiasm and just the buzz, you know, it's the buzz. Sharing things on Facebook, I don't know. How do you change a beard from black to gray? It happens, though. We've seen it happen in other topics in our country, you know. And a good example, you know what, the best example to me, I was a smoker for 35 years. I smoked on airplanes. In college, I smoked in class. My teacher smoked in class. I smoked on the train. You smoked in the grocery store. You smoked in the car. Doctor smoked in the office. And, I mean, you tell this to young people, they think you're completely nuts. And you're like, yeah, I smoked everywhere. In fact, I worked at Glenbrook Hospital. I was the night receptionist. And I smoked behind the desk, you know, I can smoke it away. Oh yeah, let's see, oh yeah, you got a cut there. You know, and a lot of people smoked, and a lot of people still smoke. But look how persistence, it can, and now you can't even remember. I remember because I still miss my cigarettes, but, but you can't even remember those days. So I think it can happen. I think it can happen. Any other questions? All right, well, we have, do you have the summary handouts? We have a lot of things you can have. You're all going to get a summary sheet, which is just a little summary of the PowerPoint.
You brought up about the bits.
Yeah. Yeah. And then all.
Is the website on there for the full?
I'm not sure. I think we made that before we had the website. But, you know, if you Google League of Women Voters Wilmette, it'll go right there. And then it's Wilmette, yeah. And it's like something like our advocacy, and you have to go on a couple of clicks and it'll find it. Now over here, if you want to come over, I won't hand them out. I don't have enough. I don't think everyone wants them. There is a copy of the league position with a little background. There is a handout about the compact, and we have copies of the Constitution if you want one for yourself. Be our guest. They're free today. And did you have a question?
Suggestion.
Oh,
good. Make a Reader's Digest version of this and put it up as a TED Talk.
Oh, very cool.
Oh, can anybody just do that?
Do a TED Talk?
We were thinking of videotaping one of the presentations and linking it to. We do have a Facebook page, so I think that's a good idea. I think we should do that. Do it as a PowerPoint with something like that. Yeah, that would be a good way. Thank you.
Share on Facebook, it's very effective.
Yes, yes.
Did you want to talk about the Facebook page?
Just we have one, you know.
There is a
Facebook
Facebook
page. Yeah, it's just it's just starting out, and
Yeah, it's
so,
just starting.
Yeah.
We have some plans to keep it more active
Right.
and up to date, but
Yeah.
if you want to get in on the early signs
Right,
of it,
yeah.
if you just search on Facebook for Abolish the Electoral College, you'll see that one has a League of Women Voters. Two websites will come, or two Facebook pages or groups will come up, but one of them has LWV, the league logo on it, and that's ours.
And then, do we have our email address on that someplace on the summary? Because we do have an email, and it'll be on the Wilmette League website, but it's really just it just comes to my desk. It's LWV Abolish Electoral at gmail.com. So if you have any questions.
If you're the
Oh, and
kind
then
of
more
person who wants
resources.
to
Yeah,
read
yeah.
more about it,
Right.
there's everything from YouTube videos to entire thick books with very small print to various articles. There's lots of other things, resources that you can go to learn more.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.